I never believed in ghosts until I moved into that old house on the edge of town. It was a beautiful Victorian-style mansion, with ornate decorations and a sprawling garden. I thought I had found my dream home, but as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick and heavy, and the room was filled with an eerie silence. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floorboards creaked under my feet. I thought it was just the age of the house, but soon, I began to hear strange noises at night. It started with whispers in the walls, like someone was speaking just out of reach. Then, I heard footsteps in the hallway, even though I knew I was the only one in the house. Every time I turned around, I saw a shadow darting away from me, disappearing into the darkness. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But then, I woke up one night to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a woman, dressed in a white gown, with long, flowing hair. Her face was pale and drawn, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The woman just stared at me, her expression blank. She didn't move or speak, but I knew she was there, watching me. After what felt like hours, she vanished, leaving me alone in the dark. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to leave the house, but every time I tried to pack my bags, I felt a force holding me back. It was like the house didn't want me to leave, like it was alive and had a will of its own. I was trapped in that haunted house, with no way out. Every night, I heard the whispers and footsteps, and I knew the ghostly woman was watching me. I never believed in ghosts before, but now, I know they exist, and I'm living in their world. I moved into a new apartment a few months ago, and things were fine at first. But as time passed, I began to notice strange things happening. At first, it was small things, objects moving on their own and doors opening and closing by themselves. But then things got worse. I started hearing strange noises in the middle of the night, whispers, footsteps, and sometimes even laughter. I tried to ignore it, but it became too much. I couldn't sleep, and I was constantly on edge. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a loud bang coming from the closet. I cautiously opened the door and saw that all of my clothes had been thrown to the floor. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a draft or an earthquake, but I knew deep down that it was something else. Things only got worse from there. I started seeing things, shadows moving on the walls, figures standing in the corner of my eye. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that something was in my apartment. One night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was shrouded in darkness, and I couldn't make out its features. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared, but I knew that it wasn't over. I couldn't take it anymore. I called in a paranormal investigator, and they confirmed what I already knew: my apartment was haunted. They found evidence of a tragic event that had occurred in the past, and it seemed that the spirits of the previous tenants were still lingering. I had to move out of the apartment, but the experience left me scarred. I still have nightmares about the figure standing at the foot of my bed, and I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that it's still following me. I've always been a bit of an adventurer, so when my friend invited me to go camping in the woods, I jumped at the opportunity. We set up camp near a lake, built a fire, and settled in for the night. That's when things started to get weird. It started with a strange rustling in the bushes. We thought it was just an animal, but then we heard footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. We grabbed our flashlights and scanned the woods, but we couldn't see anything. Suddenly, we saw a figure in the distance, shrouded in darkness. It was a man, but something was off about him. He was wearing old clothes, like from a different era, and he was walking with a limp. We tried to call out to him, but he didn't respond. The man approached us, his eyes fixed on us with a strange intensity. He told us his name was Samuel and that he had been lost in the woods for years. He looked sick, with skin that was pale and clammy. We offered him food and water, but he refused. As the night wore on, Samuel became more and more agitated. He kept muttering to himself and staring at us with a strange intensity. We tried to ignore him and go to sleep, but we couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching us. That's when things took a dark turn. In the middle of the night, we heard Samuel screaming. We rushed out of our tent and saw him writhing on the ground, his body contorted in pain. We tried to help him, but it was too late. He died right there in front of us. We reported the incident to the authorities, but when they went to investigate, they found nothing. No sign of Samuel, no evidence of his existence. It was like he had vanished into thin air. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something strange happened in those woods. Was Samuel a ghost, a figment of our imagination, or something else entirely? I don't know, but I do know that I won't be going back to those woods anytime soon. I recently moved into a new apartment complex, and everything seemed perfect until I met my neighbor. He was an older man who always seemed to be watching me. Every time I left my apartment, he would be waiting in the hallway, staring at me with a blank expression. One day, I noticed that my doorknob was slightly loose. I didn't think much of it until I came home to find my apartment had been ransacked. My belongings were scattered everywhere, and it was clear that someone had gone through all of my things. The only thing missing was a small box that I kept hidden under my bed. I went to the building manager to report the break-in, but he just brushed it off and said that there had been no sign of forced entry. I couldn't shake the feeling that my strange neighbor was behind it. From that day on, I was constantly on edge. I would hear strange noises at night, like someone walking around in my apartment. I even found a note under my door that read, "I'm always watching you." I knew it was him. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront my neighbor, but when I knocked on his door, there was no answer. I tried the doorknob, and to my horror, it was unlocked. I cautiously stepped inside and found his apartment completely empty, except for a single chair facing a blank wall. As I turned to leave, I felt a cold hand grab my shoulder. I turned around to see my neighbor standing behind me, his eyes dark and empty. He whispered, "I've been waiting for you." I screamed and ran out of the apartment, never to return. To this day, I still have nightmares about my strange neighbor, and I always double-check my locks before going to bed. I've always loved hiking, so when I heard about a new trail that had recently opened, I couldn't wait to explore it. I planned my trip meticulously, bringing all the necessary gear and provisions, and setting out early in the morning. The trail was stunning, with breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains. But as the day wore on, I realized that I had lost my way. I had been so focused on the scenery that I had failed to pay attention to the trail markers. I tried retracing my steps, but everything looked the same. The sun was setting, and I knew I had to find shelter before nightfall. I stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin, and although it was run down, I was relieved to have a place to rest for the night. I settled in, hoping to sleep until morning, but I soon realized that I was not alone. I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, as if someone was watching me. I brushed it off as my imagination, but as the night went on, the footsteps grew louder. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but then I heard a voice, soft and sinister. It whispered my name, over and over again. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. I knew that I had to leave the cabin, but I was too afraid to face whatever was waiting for me outside. As the sun rose the next morning, I gathered my things and fled the cabin, never looking back. I reported the incident to the authorities, but they found no evidence of anyone else on the trail. To this day, I can still hear the whispering voice in my nightmares, reminding me of that terrifying night in the woods. I was part of a group of urban explorers who loved to seek out abandoned places and uncover their secrets. One day, we decided to visit an old hospital that had been closed down for years. The hospital was massive, with crumbling brick walls and shattered windows. We snuck inside, and as we explored the dark hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. We made our way to the basement, and that's when we heard it, a faint whispering coming from the shadows. We followed the sound, and it led us to a small room with a rusted metal door. My curiosity got the best of me, and I pushed open the door. Inside, we found a collection of old medical equipment and strange symbols scrawled on the walls. As we examined the symbols, the whispering grew louder. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around, but no one was there. We tried to run, but the door had locked from the outside. We were trapped in the basement, and the whispering grew louder and more intense. We could feel something watching us from the shadows, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. We huddled together, praying for help, but no one came. We spent the night in that room, surrounded by darkness and the eerie whispers of the hospital's past. It was the most terrifying experience of my life, and I'll never forget the feeling of being trapped in that abandoned hospital, with no escape from the unknown horrors that lurked in the shadows. If you liked listening to this, please consider subscribing. I caught a ghastly glimpse of myself in the mirror this morning. I was so scared, I almost called Ghostbusters.